everyone. Welcome to Lit Chats. My name is Amber Peterson, and I am the Chief Program Officer for LitWorld. LitWorld works with amazing community-based organizations all over the world. With them, we deliver literacy programming and create safe and brave spaces for young people and communities to celebrate their stories and learn the world through them. As LitWorld enters its next chapter, we embrace a new, more expansive definition of literacy, encompassing all of the myriad ways we communicate with, are affected by, and shape the world around us. Central to that definition of literacy is our ability to read. And the science of reading helps us to understand the mechanics of, I think, a deceptively complex practice that so many of us take for granted. Today, I have the pleasure of speaking with Shannon Hickey. She's a brilliant educator, she's the CEO of LitLife, and she is going to help us to understand what science tells us about learning how to read. Thank you so much for joining me in conversation today, Shannon.
Thank you, Amber, for having me. I'm so excited. I love this LitWorld team, and I'm happy to chat a little bit today about what we love at LitLife, the science of reading.
Awesome. Ready to learn. All right. So I know that there's been a lot of buzz about the science of reading. We hear it in education policy conversations. We hear it in teacher trainings for teachers, even for parents. We've been hearing it on social media and in other places. But for I think a lot of people, it still feels like a kind of vague technical term.
Yeah.
Can you explain what the science of reading is and how it differs from other approaches to literacy instruction?
I think that's such an important question because we hear it everywhere. We see it everywhere. It's a focus of conversations at so many different levels. Government levels, at district and state levels, at down to the classroom level, across the globe. We are seeing so much conversation about it. And there is a shared definition, but not everyone knows it. So I think that's a great first question. So science of reading actually isn't a specific approach. It's not a curriculum and it's not a resource. So you can't go out and buy the science of reading. The Reading League, which is a leader across the globe when it comes to reading, defines the science of reading as a vast interdisciplinary body of scientifically based research about reading and issues related to reading and writing. So when we say vast, that means thousands of studies across the world in many different languages. So we're not just talking about one area of the United States. We're not talking about the United States and Canada. We're talking about all over the world in many different languages. And when we say interdisciplinary, that means that we're including lots of different perspectives. So we have psychology, we have cognitive science talking about how the brain works, and we have all of the different areas and branches of education. So all of them are compiling this science to tell us, how does our brain work? What does it need to learn how to read? And what do we need to do in order to help people when they're learning to read and write so that they can get the greatest impact?
Oh, I love that. And it's incredible how many kind of facets of knowledge are included in thinking about this act of learning to read.
Exactly.
We learn very young, and I think we think, oh, this must be relatively simple to do. But there's so many different things that are happening in our brains as we happen.
Gosh, it's so true, right? Because we do it in a lot of places, before we're even the age of 10, right? So you think, oh, if it's child's play, then it must be simple. And it's not. It's such a powerful process.
Yeah. So what does current brain science actually tell us about how we learn how to read?
That's a great question too. So it's important to know how it works. And we need to think about reading as having two parts. So reading having two parts means that there's a part where our brain understands, like you said, the mechanics. How do words work? And this is called word recognition. And then the other piece is, what does language communicate? And that's language comprehension. So if we dive in first, this first part, this first bucket of word recognition, that's that nuts and bolts of learning. We teach them how sounds work, how sounds connect to letters. So sounds in our language That's called phonological or phonemic awareness, that words are made up of sounds, that sounds are all around us. And then we learn that sounds are connected to symbols. And that's true in any written language, right? Across the globe, in any language that has a writing system, there's some sort of symbol that represents sounds and words. So that could be in English, that's letters. And in another language, that might be characters. So it's really a common shared feature.
Mm.
And that for us in English is called phonics. And then as we teach sounds, letters, and symbols, then we start reading simple words. So we can start reading words and we can start putting words together in simple sentences. And it's really important to have a foundation of phonics so that when you're reading in English, you can read any word, right? We don't want to just memorize words. We want to know how words and sounds and letters work so that we can read any word we find.
Yeah.
But the other part of that is language comprehension. So this is how we understand what we read. This is how we learn new information. It's how we talk about ideas. It's how we think about the stories that we love. Or when we're reading a nonfiction book, maybe about dinosaurs. This is how we understand and enjoy all sorts of different types of texts. And if we're going to read, truly read, we have to be able to do both at the same time. So that's
Mm.
why when you see kindergarten, first, second grade, or those first years of school, we spend a lot of time teaching phonics because that's the way we're going to unlock words for students to be able to read. But
Mm.
we also spend a lot of time reading aloud in younger grades, when our favorite children's stories, our favorite picture books, because reading with a grown-up who cares about us is a really fabulous way to build interest, to have playful conversations. And that doesn't always have to be a teacher, right? It can be a family member, it can be a community member who enjoys reading. And I think it's also important to remember here that if you're maybe a family member who struggles with reading or doesn't is not a reader yourself, that doesn't mean you can't have these great conversations. Having conversations with kids really helps them to be set up for successful reading. And so I think that's also kind of a misnomer, that you have to be really good at reading to help a child be good at reading. And
Yeah.
you don't. You just have to love them and talk to them and celebrate their growth as we go.
Oh,
And then kind of the final thing here about how the brain works when we're learning how to read. There's two words that you'll also hear in that science of reading, and one is explicit and systematic. So explicit means that I'm going to do this on purpose. If I'm teaching you the letter M, I'm going to teach you that sound. I'm going to teach you how to write the uppercase and the lowercase m. And then we're going to look at all sorts of different types of words where we see the letter M so that you can have an opportunity to read that word. And that process that we're taking, that's the system,
yeah.
right? So going from letter to letter and then putting letters together, having a certain order, that's the system. So explicit means I'm doing it on purpose, and system means I'm having that order and organization of what I'm teaching and why it matters.
Awesome. There are so many different pieces to this, and it makes sense. I mean, when you're watching, if you've ever seen a young person kind of learning to read, you can actually kind of see all of these different steps kind of come to fruition. You do start figuring out how to decode first, and then you start making meaning out of those things that you're decoding. And I love what you said about being very explicit, about being,
Mhm.
wanting to make sure that you are doing this intentionally. And I
Right.
think that that's a huge part of the science of reading here. Well, thank you for that. I think it's a lot to
It's a
chew on.
lot, yeah, it's a lot to digest, and
A
that's why
lot
I
to
think is a
digest.
really important consideration for our listeners is, you grasping on to a few of these words and being able to now connect them with, okay, I see where this word fits, or now I know what this word doesn't mean, right?
Yes.
So that, I think that's even a great place to start as an educator, as you're coming into this world of science of reading, if it's new to you, is to be able to say, Okay, if someone's trying to sell me something by saying it's science of reading approved,
Mm.
then there might be some guesswork that I have to have here. At least I know that now.
Yes, yes. Actually, it's a great segue into my next question, which is that there's, a lot of ideas floating around, not just about what the science of reading is, but how reading happens. Some of
Hmm.
those are helpful and they kind of give us some insight we might not have had before, but others might be holding us back. So from your
Absolutely.
perspective, what are some of the common myths or misconceptions about learning to read or the science of reading, and how does the actual science of reading help clear them up?
Yeah, that's a great, great question. So I think the first one is to know that learning language is natural.
Mm,
Whatever language we hear as babies, or even if we're signed to in a home where sign language is a form of communication, whatever communication system is used with us as babies, we learn. This is why we see children who grow up in homes with more than one language learn all of those language, and it feels so easy because learning to communicate is a really natural human process.
mm,
We are hardwired to communicate. But reading is not a natural process. So if I put a book in your hand, you won't automatically learn how to read. So we
mm,
have to be taught how to read. We actually, when we teach a child how to read and a child learns how to read, their brains actually change. We're actually developing gray matter in their brains, which is fascinating. So anyone who tells you, this is going to be your magic, these magical beans for learning how to read, that's not true. They need instruction to learn how to read. For some kiddos, it feels really easy and they just pick it up super quick. Some kids it takes a little bit more work, and that's fine, but they all need to be taught.
mm,
Another one is you learn how to read once, one time, right? Because the concept of that text hold meaning. When a book is in front of me, there's a message here, and I can extract that message, that I can pull words off the page, and then when I write that I can put words back onto a page. This process is learned one time.
mm,
This big idea of the purpose and function of reading and writing. And then from there, the the amount of languages we can learn how to read and write is a matter of learning how spelling works, how the symbols work, how the sentences, what the grammar is like from Spanish to English or to German or any other language. Another thing to know, or to make sure that we have clear in our minds, and there are some myths and misconceptions about that, is that um, new readers need phonics to read words. So for a long time across the US and in a lot of other English speaking countries and schools around the globe, we were using programs that were encouraging children to guess at words.
mm,
And so we wondered why we were not getting the kinds of results, or sometimes kids would make some great gains and then they would kind of peter off, and it wouldn't be when they wouldn't keep growing in the same way. That's because we run out of space in our brains when we memorize.
mm.
We
Yeah.
run out of space. We can only hold so many. But when we have all of the puzzle pieces of how to put together words, then we can be really expansive with how we learn how to read more and more words, which is great when we get into more complex upper grades, big scientific or mathematical texts. So when we think about beyond the world of story, so many big words live in the sciences and live in the engineering world, and we want to make sure that as many readers have access to that language to be able to understand how the world works as well. So you really want to make sure that any program that is really solid in its science of reading knowledge is not going to encourage kids to guess at words.
Mm, mm. And you just presented so many big ideas, big important ideas in what you just said. I'm going to go back to the first one, which was that reading is not necessarily a natural activity, and to do it, we are rewiring our brains,
Yeah.
rewiring the way that we take in information, in
Isn't
order
that
to do that.
isn't that
That's
fascinating? I
fascinating.
think when I first learned of that in my work, it just made me feel a deep sense of honor to the work that I do, and a deep sense of responsibility, right? I have a great responsibility to help a child's brain become more complex, to
Oh,
become more accessible to more information. And that's a big deal. And so the work of our educators across the globe who bring that potential to a child, I think it's important to stand in that power and be like, yeah, absolutely. I'm doing some huge and important work.
oh my gosh, absolutely. I think it also just gives a little bit of context to how difficult this process is for us as just human beings. And I
Yeah,
think a lot of us are lucky to be able to learn when we're very young, to shape our brains this way. But
right.
when you think about just human experience,
Yeah,
it's only been very recently that most of
yeah,
us are literate.
yeah,
And
exactly.
to think about the degree to which our literacy is so important today, like how essential that is for us to just engage with the world.
Yeah. And
How
that
important it
is
is that we get that access.
so true what you said. Having the widest global access to
Mm,
reading is is very new in human history.
yeah.
Very new in human history. And but we can take a lot of connections to, how have people learned across the globe, right? Side
Yeah.
by side with caring adults who show them how things are done, right? That's how all of us have learned, how our family structure functions, how the society and community around us works, what's important, what are our values. So that same application of this is how it works, this is why it matters, this is how it's going to be useful to you, is a similar kind of vision of why reading or how to teach reading.
Yeah, totally. I think that's one thing that's like kind of incredible about the science of reading, is that it is a study of all of those things that impact our ability to do that, and it takes
Mhm.
into account just the psychology and the the way that our brains are actually are do what they do, and
Right.
what's happening around the world, and just how we all acquire language. So
Yeah.
um, it is a important, I think, very systematic approach
Yes.
to this. um,
Absolutely.
I mean, I think for for educators, this is incredible, and it's wonderful to start to dive into this. But as a parent, or for families, or for folks who are not coming at this from an educator perspective, it can feel a little bit overwhelming. We know
Absolutely.
that things like phonics are important, and we know how important the science is, but how do we translate this into our daily routines? So
Yeah, I think
how do teachers,
such
parents bring these principles into everyday settings?
That is so true. Because if it's overwhelming for educators, and it is overwhelming for educators, and imagine families at home that maybe are not in this realm. Their work takes them they're experts at other fields, they're experts at other things. So we have to work together, educators and families, for the good of all readers and writers. We have to mutually support one another, but we do have different roles. So at home, I think speaking whatever your language is, if that language is English, if that language is any other language, speak that language with your child. Like, go back to this idea that language learning is natural. Even though reading is not natural, language learning is. So when multilingual students have really strong home languages, they have this deep wealth of knowledge. They do better as they learn new languages.
Mm,
So your child's additional languages, all the languages that come from home, are going to help them as they learn new language. They're not going to confuse them. They're not going to hurt them. They are going to help them to connect to the new language. And then
Adds.
another, yeah, isn't that, and that's another piece, that's the science tells us that. The science of reading tells us that. And another important thing to do is spend time having interesting conversations. We talked about if we can read together, fabulous. And we know that families are really busy. There's not always a lot of extra time. But even if it's just a few short minutes, before bed, getting ready for the day, when everyone's brushing their teeth and or grabbing a meal or heading out the door, en route to school and work, if you can ask your child questions, really listen to their answers, engage in a conversation, that can be really powerful in helping them learn how to read.
Oh,
And the final one is actually another big piece of science that's really important, is that children need to play. If we can encourage them to play, to create, to do things with their hands, this really develops their language and their creativity. When we have language and we have a broad sense of story and creativity, that's actually going to really help them learn how to read at school.
oh,
And
I love.
if we move over to school, our educators, something we want to make sure is that what you're teaching, when, why, and how. We got
Mm,
to do it on purpose. And we got
yeah,
to do it on purpose every day. The best way to avoid students struggling to read is to make it not be a problem from the start, right? To prevent it. And when we teach really well from the start, we can prevent a lot of the really difficult moments that come later on, right? We don't want to wait and see. We don't want to just wait and see, oh, well, we'll see what happens in second grade, or we'll see what happens in third grade. I'm sure it'll click. No, we need to help it before it becomes such a big challenge that everyone's frustrated. And a
yeah,
frustrated young person is not going to find that joy of reading. A
yeah,
frustrated young person is going to turn off, right? So we want to
absolutely.
take action right away, making sure you have a really strong phonics approach and making sure that you have excellent books to read aloud and talk about in your classroom. Those two things are kind of non-negotiables.
Yeah, absolutely. Going back to that intentionality and being explicit about what it is that you're doing. I
Yeah,
love that. I love that. And I'm going to piggyback on one of the things that you said just now and then also earlier about reading aloud. And as you know, LitWorld loves reading aloud.
I love reading that.
Shout out to World Read Aloud Day, which is the first Wednesday of
Absolutely.
every February. But yes, no, I think that there's so much. Part of the reason we love reading aloud so much is that there's so much. Um, it's such a powerful and kind of accessible tool for being able to strengthen that same act in young people. Um, but I love that. I love that. This is. I feel like we could talk about this
We
for
could, I know, we could
hours
go,
and hours. This is
keep
fascinating.
going.
And this definitely will not be the last conversation, hopefully, we have with
I
you
hope not.
about this as Lit World continues to develop in terms of the science of reading and what that
Absolutely.
means for our programming and our work.
Yeah.
Um, I have one final question for you, and it's a fun one we've been asking everyone recently. But if literacy were a superhero, what would its superpower be?
Oh, what a great question. So I think because literacy unlocks access to knowledge, opportunity, story, I think its superpower is some sort of magical key.
Ooh,
This magical key unlocks everything you're curious about, everything that are inside your hopes and dreams that you want to share with the world. This knowledge we need, and that magical key just unlocks it all for every child. And actually what I think is actually it's magical superpower on on par with unlocking the information is that it also we also teach them how to use that key, right? So they get to take that
yes.
key wherever they
Yeah.
go, and then they know how to use it.
I love it. You have eternal access to this magical key. It
Yes.
continuously unlocks new and newer and bigger and better and more diverse doors every single time you use it. I love that. That's
Yeah,
great.
yeah.
Shannon, thank you so much for joining me on this lit chat. It has been such a pleasure to speak with you and to learn from you today. To learn more about LitLife and their incredible work, check out www.litlifepd.com. You can also follow them on Instagram and Facebook, and we encourage you to do so. To everyone who is listening to us today, thank you so much for tuning in. Make sure to follow LitWorld on Facebook, Instagram, and X to stay up to date with all the amazing things we're doing. Visit us at litworld.org to learn more about our work and to donate. Thank you again, and we'll see you soon. Bye bye.